This week's video is sponsored by the upcoming Kickstarter for Nimble, a rule set for streamlining your 5e game. Imagine faster and more tactical 5e combat, minimizing tedious waiting, wasted turns, and absolutely unnecessary bookkeeping while maximizing player agency, DM agency, and giving your players the opportunity to make quick but interesting and very flavorful choices inside of an already existing 5e game. If that all sounds too good to be true, then I have the Kickstarter for you to check out. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name is Garmin. This is the Storycraft Society, and this week we are going to be talking about a Kickstarter that I am real excited about. I have talked a long time on this channel about how much I like 5e for its simplicity and the way that it gets the rules out of the way so that you can just play Dungeons and Dragons and tell cool stories with your friends. I don't need to spend time talking about what modifiers and unnecessary stack 'em up numbers I have to add onto my roll. What I get to do is spend more time describing how my character does or what my character says, or for me it's less math and it's more fun. Well, as soon as the Kickstarter for Nimble came across my desk, I was enthralled by the idea of streamlining my 5e game even more. Maybe you're a DM that has a bunch of new players. Maybe you're a DM who just gets bogged down by the rules. Maybe your group is just trying to try something different that will give you the opportunity to spend more time on narrative and less time on rolling. I think that this is a really cool system that can be plug and played into your already existing 5e game. And the cool thing is that there's almost really no risk with it, because each little section of rules is like its own module that stands alone that you could plug in, see how your group likes it, and then pull it out if they don't. You could take all the rules, you could take one of the rules, you could take little bits and pieces of the rules. But really, I cannot wait to start talking about it, so I'm just gonna start talking about it. Let's jump into it. So what I'm going to try to do in this video is go over overviews of some basic concepts that Nimble does. I don't want to give necessarily everything away, but I want to talk about the things that I feel like most people would, if I'm going to be honest, kind of love or hate, because if your type of group really likes the mathematical complexity and the, number crunchy bit of trying to get the most optimal math on your character sheet, this might not be the system or the version of a system for you. But if you're the type that you get annoyed with having to spend a lot of time on the math, I think you'll like it. Okay, so the first thing that I would like to talk about is how Nimble handles attacks. Now I want you to go ahead and just buckle your seatbelts up, because this is going to get crazy very quickly. The thing that they get rid of is armor class. It's gone. It's kind of another thing eventually, but right now, it's gone. The way that works is you almost always hit. Let's say your first level fighter is going to swing their short sword at the goblin. They will declare one of their damage dice as their primary die. In this case, there's only one d6, so there's only one die to consider. And when you roll, that primary die will either get a 1, a number in between, or a 6. A 6 is considered a critical, a 1 is considered a miss. But anything else in between is just damage that you automatically deal to your enemy. There is still a little bit of chance, but for the most part, you are more likely to do something and do it quickly with only one die roll. If you crit by getting the highest number on your damage die, like the 6 on that d6 example, you get to then roll your damage die again, and then that is going to continue stacking. So if you keep rolling 6s, you get to keep rolling damage. So you could end up with that 1, if you just keep rolling 6s over and over and over again, that could end up being 30 points of damage or something crazy, which I just think is such a cool system, and it gets you making attacks quickly, and it doesn't require a bunch of rolling. And honestly, at this point in the video, I imagine that some of you out there are already starting to sweat, shake your head, or groan because you just hate this system. And I think that that is a very valid way to be for certain tables. But for me, when I heard this, I was like, it's taking the non-cinematic stuff out of D&D, the dice rolling, and simplifying it down to basically the minimum that it has to be to retain the potential to miss, but also the chance to do really, really, really awesome things. And also with that said, it gives this interesting dynamic to the weapons, because a dagger is infinitely more likely to miss, but it's also infinitely more likely to crit, whereas the bigger damage dice, like a D12, is going to be infinitely less likely to crit or miss, but it is going to be way more likely to give you consistent damage. And that's an interesting mechanic that in D&D we don't really get into, where every single character is rolling a D20 and adding their modifier. One thing that I will mention as a side note about this particular rule that I think I would have to see in action in a game before I make a decision about it is I could see this getting really dangerous for PCs really quick at level 1. And the example that I give is you have a 1 in 4 chance to crit with a dagger, which means that if your goblins are carrying daggers, they have a 1 in 4 chance to crit. And then they have a 1 in 4 chance to crit again on that damage, and then a 1 in 4 chance to crit again on that damage. It would be nothing. I mean, I don't know what the math is, but it seems like it would be very frequent that you could end up stacking up a whole bunch of critical damage and knocking out level 1 PCs like crazy. But again, that comes down to where DMs maybe need to fudge the rolls, or maybe at low levels, you just take the crits entirely away from the monsters. Just kind of like nerdy DM craft stuff that I think is at least kind of interesting. All right, so let's move on to another one. The way that traditional D&D 5e handles a player's turn is they can move, they can take an action, they can take a bonus action, and then somewhere in the rest of the turn order, they can take a reaction. This is something that I as a DM have struggled teaching to new players, and it shouldn't feel like it's something that's that complicated, particularly to people who have been playing tabletop role-playing games for a really long time. But for new players, this can be a really confusing thing, and I think that the way that Nimble handles this is very, very streamlined. So what they give you is 3 action points, and those action points can be spent to move or take an attack, and those things are not restricted. You could move, move, move. 3 action points, spend 1 to move 3 times. There you go, that's your turn. Or you could attack, attack, attack. Anything that would give you an ability to use as a bonus action or as a free action, something like the cunning action that the rogue gets, you can take for 0 AP on your turn. Casting spells, if they are leveled, require 2 action points, whereas bonus action spells take 1 action point. I think that's probably the most fiddly thing to remember in the action point system that Nimble presents. And then the final thing is if you are making attack, attack, attack with your 3 action points, stacking disadvantage applies to the final. So on the first one, it's just a regular attack. You're rolling 2d20 and taking the lesser on the second, and 3d20 and taking the lesser on the third. Now I'm gonna read this from the book. This is a designer's note on this system, and I think that it's very telling for what the designer's mindset was when putting this together. Designer's note: this greatly improves tactical decisions. Grappling, shoving, moving, and reactions are all far more interesting choices now. You could attack 3 times at level 1, but there are diminishing returns. This is a really cool concept because now making an attack and then shoving, that's cooler because you're not taking that shove action at a disadvantage, but the second attack would be. You're gonna get a lot more things happening in your combat than just the traditional I run up, I hit them, they run up, they hit me. Here's another opportunity for me to say I am not going over every little tiny bit of these rules. I'm just giving you the little bits of flavor so that it either piques your interest or tells you that it's not something that you'd be interested in. I keep coming back to this over and over myself. Every one of these, if nothing else, are intriguing for me to try in my game, because if you take this action point system, you could not take the attack system. And you could just drop the action point system in for one session and see what your players think. If they love it, great. Keep it as a rule for your table forever. If they don't like it, maybe drop that one and put the attack option in. See what they think of that. If they like it, keep it. If they don't, you can move on to another. It just feels really cool to me, I'll be honest. The idea of little tiny modular rules that you can pop in and pop out, really cool. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna talk about two more. There's a lot more that I could talk about, but I think I'm gonna stick to these two because they're the ones that got me the most excited. So the next one we're gonna talk about is dying and how the dying condition works in Nimble. In traditional 5e, if you go under 0 hit points, your character falls over, and now you sit at the table until someone can get you back up. There are times where this can be very dramatic and suspenseful, but a lot of times it will result in the players going, well, I can wait until you've failed 1 or 2 death saves before I try to heal you back up, and then I'll get you back up. But then that gets the fight over quicker, but it keeps that player just sitting at the table twiddling their thumbs because they can't do anything. Nimble decides to handle this by giving you the dying condition. When you drop below 0 hit points, you do not die, but you are now dying. What that means is you on your turn are reduced to 1 AP. You can only do one thing per turn, and you immediately gain a level of exhaustion. That then can compound because attacks and spells cast will make you make a saving throw, and if you fail that save, you'll gain another level of exhaustion. Taking damage will give you an immediate 2 levels of exhaustion. Taking a crit will give you 3 levels of exhaustion. And lastly, if you get to the 6th level of exhaustion, that's where your character just outright dies. It gives a lot longer of a time that you can see things happening, and it puts the fate of the character in the player's hands. Yes, you can stay in the combat if you're below 0 hit points, and you can keep attacking. You're going to be doing it at disadvantage, and you're really going to make yourself more susceptible to ending up stacking more levels of exhaustion. But you also could try to get yourself to safety and try to help from a distance if you can, or drink a potion, or get yourself away. It keeps the player, even though they are dying, doing something on their turn. I'm going to give a quick read of the designer's note here because I think it's very telling also. Designer's note: going unconscious and being in timeout is not fun. Instead, now you can still play your turn and have choices to make. Do you block, run away, drink the last potion, or attack and risk injuring yourself further? There is still a real risk of permanent death, but PCs can see it coming sooner and actually do something about it. They have a chance to contribute, or if all is truly hopeless, they can at least role play their dying words. I feel like that sums it up really well with this dying condition, and a really, really cool addition that you could just boop, drop into your game, see how it works. All right, so the last thing that I'm gonna talk about is how monsters work, because again, I'm typically behind the screen most of the time. So this was the section that I was most interested to see how the monsters would be on my side of the screen. To keep the combat quick and easy to run for DMs, the monsters automatically hit just like PCs, but they don't get action points. In the Nimble system, for monster attacks, they are gonna get a slight damage increase, so they would roll whatever their damage die is, and then they would actually lose whatever modifier is on the damage dice, but then they would gain their to hit. So if a goblin has a +4 to hit on their short sword, they would roll 1d6 for their damage +4 instead of the traditional 1d6 +1 or 2 or whatever that would be. This little tweak keeps the monsters feeling dangerous, particularly with some other things that show up in the Nimble system, like a block and dodge system that they have that I didn't talk about in this video. They also keep it really, really simple. Then, what I think is the coolest thing in all of the monster section is how they handle monster AC, which is that monsters have either light, medium, or heavy armor, depending on whatever their original AC was in their stat block. Now, critical hits and damage vulnerabilities just ignore AC altogether. It just isn't a thing that you even calculate. So that way, a player who's attacking a super heavily armored monster can still crit and do a whole bunch of damage and feel like a hero. One of the first things that jumped into my mind when I started looking at this Kickstarter is the old adage that we have always heard, that Dungeons & Dragons is 30 minutes of fun spread out over 4 hours. And I, as a DM, do everything in my power to minimize that effect at my table. I try to take the mundane and make it exciting. I try to remember that even when the goblin is swinging their sword, I try to paint it into as much of a picture as possible. Even if they miss, I try to describe the blade just very faintly nicking the end of my PC's nose so that they know that they really got away with one. And hopefully that keeps my players invested in their characters and invested even when the combat isn't necessarily that mathematically engaging. Nimble does this in a lot of ways, but they're going at it not necessarily from the narrative side, but they're going at it from the rules side. Now, I could make this video 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours long and just keep talking about all of the cool things in this system, but I think I've talked enough and showed enough of it that it will make it real clear whether this system is right for you. And the best part that I can say about all of this is the plug and play nature of this system. You don't need to decide if the rules are right for you and your table in a big lump effort where you're like, hey everybody, take this huge rule book and read it and learn it so that we can try it for our next campaign. You can just pick an idea, drop it into your current campaign, play it for a session or two, see if you like it, and then keep it or get rid of it if it doesn't do anything for your group. I love that modularity, if that's a word. I just think that that's very cool and a neat thing that we could all try as DMs and Dungeons & Dragons players. But with that said, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know what you think of it down below. This is definitely the type of thing that I think could encourage a lot of conversation down in the comments below. I would just love to hear what your thoughts are. But thank you so much to Evan for sending this over. This has been an absolute blast for me going through all of these rules and figuring out how or what I think of them, just even as conversation pieces that I could bring up to my friends the next time that we're waiting for somebody to get there when we're playing D&D. I cannot wait for the Kickstarter to go live, and all of you can check it out as well. So I'll put links to all that stuff down in the description. If you enjoyed this video, do all of the YouTube stuff. Share this video with a friend that you think would enjoy it. That's the #1 way that you can help out a small YouTube channel. Like the video, subscribe, all that stuff. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. And I think that's it for this week. So until next week, I'll be seeing you.